Good evening. Thank you for joining us for tonight's Inspiration webinar. Inspiration Software is the embroidery software line of G7 Solutions and designs and machine embroidery. Our Inspiration line includes My Block Piecer, My Quilt Embellisher, Perfect Embroidery Pro, and Perfect Stitch Viewer, and the new Word Art and Stitches and the new My Quilt Planner. Tonight's webinar features our Perfect Embroidery Pro. Raise the bar for buttonholes. We have a wonderful team assisting us tonight. Inspiration Tech Support Team, Nancy R., Chris L., Dory D. I would like to present you to our bombastic buttonhole blazer, Katherine Artines, who will blow you away with a bevy of buttonholes. And again, thank you for joining us and enjoy the webinar.
Hello, everyone. The buttonhole, defined as a slit in a garment through which a button is passed to fasten two surfaces together. Buttonholes used to give people the shivers before the invention of the zigzag on sewing machines, and even the four-step buttonhole is something that requires your attention. Then came automatic buttonholes. But alas, they were plain. Not anymore. Perfect Embroidery Pro has raised the bar for this lowly incision. Not only will every one you do be the same custom size, but you can also make them a design element. Tonight, we will play with the buttonhole, learn how to create embroidered buttons, and then move on to baubles and bling with the bead feature. If you need more information about measuring buttons, the actual process for embroidering the buttonhole, stabilizers, etc., go to Eileen's blog at designs.com/blog and search for buttonhole. She has a number of different articles that give you excellent steps to follow. To access the 29 built-in buttonholes, we go into Perfect Embroidery Pro to the top toolbar, the last button. We'll click on the down arrow and choose Select, and you see the array of buttonholes, many decoratives, and then we also have utility buttonholes. We'll begin with the standard. I double-click that, and as we come to the screen, you notice the mouse is a crosshair, which usually means that we have the ability to click and drag to size. However, with the standard buttonhole, all we need to do is click, and we are automatically given a 1-inch high buttonhole. We also stay in that create mode. You notice the crosshairs again. So we can continue to click and create multiple buttonholes if needed. The buttonhole will always come in vertically. Certainly, you can rotate the buttonhole by using our rotate feature. We're going to take a look at a document that I've already created, a file, that has all of the buttonholes as they are listed in our buttonhole feature. If we take a look back under the select, you see these utilities, and I have placed them on the screen in the order that they appear here in the buttonhole dialog box. But I'm going to talk about them a little bit out of order. We'll start with the square, and here we're going to talk about why you might want to use any of these particular buttonholes. The square buttonhole is best for medium to heavyweight fabrics. You notice that it has a thicker bar at the top and the bottom. The rounded end buttonholes are good for lightweight fabrics like blouses. And also the fan of these stitches in the round ends secure both warp and weft fibers for the most secure finish of loosely woven fabrics. Keyhole is used with thicker buttons or shank buttons. If you are unfamiliar with that term, this is what a shank button looks like. It does not have the holes going through the face of the button. Rather, it has this area on the back through which the thread goes. And again, the keyhole is perfect for that type of button, used on jackets and coats of heavier fabrics, And these are generally stitched in a horizontal fashion, as you see on this lower one, with the rounded edge towards the edge of the fabric. We'll assume that line as your edge. We then take a look at the heirloom. We have a narrow and a standard width, and with the heirloom, these have a narrower bar at the top and the bottom, therefore making the hole or slit larger. This helps avoid stretch tearing on heirloom fabrics, which are so much finer and lighter than regular fabrics. At the end, we have two stretch buttonholes. Again, we have a narrow and a standard width. These are used for knits or stretchy fabrics, and you absolutely need a permanent fusible stabilizer behind a stretch buttonhole. We talk about the orientation of the buttonhole. These come in vertically, as we said, but horizontally is usually the more secure way to create a buttonhole. The stress due to wear is placed on the button in a horizontal position. The rule or thought behind this is the diameter of your button, half of that diameter, you want to be that distance away from the edge of your fabric when you begin your buttonhole. So this area right in here would be half the diameter of your button. If you talk about vertical orientation, the stress is placed on the buttonhole. If you take a look at any of these, if we had the button here in the center, the stress is going to be on the buttonhole, not on the button, and it could cause gapping. Generally, you'll only see a vertical placement of buttonholes in plackets or some kind of banded openings. We must first know the button size before we can create the buttonhole. So we'll take a look at this slide with buttons, and we'll talk about how to measure. On a flat button such as this, you measure the diameter or the width of the button, and we want to add 1/8 inch to that measurement. That's a 3 millimeter for those of you that use metric. And if you're talking about a round or ball button, these pictures actually come from Nancy Zeman's site. She always has great ways to do things in the sewing world. So with your round button, she suggests either a strip of paper or a narrow ribbon that you wrap around the ball button and make a mark, and then you will use half of that distance for the size of your button. With this half, we would also add that additional 1/8 inch. We add that little extra for the button to glide in easier in the buttonhole. We'll go back to the software, and our button that we're going to play with, bring up a clean screen, we'll say that our button is 1 1/8 in size. We need to add that extra 1/8, so our button is going to be need a slit that is 1.25 or 1 1/4. We'll go ahead and select our buttonhole. This time we'll play with a round, and as I go to create this buttonhole, the button will always be placed where the crosshairs is the center of the button. In other words, the crosshairs represents the center of the button. So that's helpful to know if you have to place these in certain areas. We said that all buttonholes default to 1 inch. Let's take our ruler and we'll come over here and we measure from the top, and I drag down to the bottom. Try that again. I'll go to the bottom to the top, and that button is 1 inch in height. It is not the height of the slit, and it is really the slit that we are interested in when we're talking about the size of our button. So if we were to measure the slit or the opening inside the button, it is about 0.8, so it's smaller than what we need. We come over to the properties and take a look at the height. This measurement right here in your properties buttonhole, that height represents the height of the buttonhole itself. We know that it's 1 inch. We know that the slit or opening needs to be 1.25, so we're going to bump this up then to a 1.5 as the height of the entire buttonhole, knowing that we want the opening to be 1 1/4. So again, having sized that, I will drag, and I see, oops, did I not apply that here? So that should be a little bigger at this point. Let's try that again. We'll come over here and put in our 1.5 for our height. I'll apply that. There's our bigger buttonhole. We'll get our ruler and click and drag down to measure the opening, and that opening is 1.22, very close to my 1.25, but I think just to be safe, I'll bump that up to a 1.6 and apply it and measure my opening now, and I know that I'm going to have plenty. That 1.3 is going to give a nice opening for the button that's 1 1/8. So we need to be concerned about how large the slit is or the opening in the button. Drop down a little bit and zoom here, and what we want to talk about is when here we have the standard round, but if we go in to get a decorative buttonhole, I'll go ahead and choose this 02. Remember that the crosshairs is going to, wherever I click the crosshairs, that is in the center position of the buttonhole, and we'll drop down a little bit. And here, if we measure the opening in this buttonhole, we are going to see again that the buttonhole itself is 1 inch, but the slit is 1.13. I beg your pardon. I see our situation here. Let's delete that and start again. We're going to go in and get a buttonhole and select it here. Put our size back to 1 and then create that. Looks more like what we need. And now if we measure our opening with our buttonhole being 1 inch, we have a 0.7, so this opening is even smaller than our rounded, and that's because in this decorative buttonhole we have a thicker bar at the top and bottom. So if we needed this decorative buttonhole to be a workable buttonhole for our 1 1/8 inch button, we know again that we need that slit to be 1.25 or 1 1/4. So let's bump this up to, we'll try that 1.6 and apply it. Try that again with it selected, our 1.6, and apply. And then if I get my ruler and measure that opening, I'm still a little shy of my 1 1/4. So we'll come back over here and I'll bump it up to a 1.8 and apply it. And I have my ruler and measure that slit, and I see now that I have an opening fit for my 1 1/8 button. But what I want to point out here is that when we size our utility buttonhole, the buttonhole itself does not become that much larger, but when we are dealing with a decoration with our buttonhole, you're going to have to take into account the decoration that comes with the buttonhole if that hole needs to be a certain height. So just something to keep in mind. I have another document or file that I've created for you to see. When I first started playing with my buttonholes and I saw all of those decorative buttonholes, I wanted some kind of chart for myself to be able to compare all of the decorative buttonholes, whereas the buttonhole itself, we know that each buttonhole is 1 inch in height. So if I set my guidelines at 1 inch, that allowed me to place all of these buttonholes in an equal manner so that I could see at a glance which ones are a lot larger, and then these at the very end are smaller. These would still stay within the 1 inch. So that gives me a nice way to take a look if I'm trying to decide which buttonhole I'd like to use for a particular project. So hopefully this will come in handy for you as well. All right, before we start our projects for this evening, I'll pause for a moment and ask Dory, do we have any questions at this point?
Yes, we do. We have a couple of them. Number one, I'm going to give you a math lesson. 1/8 does equal 1.25.
Yes,
Okay.
it equals 1.25. If we take that 1 1/8 button and we add our extra 1/8.
Oh, darn.
Remember,
yes.
We have to add that extra 1/8 so that we have a little give in the buttonhole. We don't want the buttonhole to be exactly the same size as the button.
Okay, and I have to say thank you, Vicki. Very nicely done. Okay, we also have Linda had wanted to know, are you using a special needle for this?
Your needle depends on your fabric. You're going to, for example, for your stretch needle, for your stretch buttonholes, you're going to use a ballpoint needle. For your heirloom, you might use a small needle, maybe a 10, depending on the weight of your thread. If you're using 50 or 60 weight thread, you would use the appropriate needle for that. So it's not so much the buttonhole that is requiring a special needle, it's the fabric that you're using this buttonhole.
Okay, and Miss Sharon would like to know, are you limited to a size that you can actually make?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that, Sharon. What a nice lead-in to our project, because that's the first thing we're going to create today is a buttonhole of a large size. And I did that on purpose to show you that indeed, yes, we can create large buttonholes. We're going to start with this project because it gets cold up here in Erie, Pennsylvania. My projects tonight are neck warming scarves. They're very easy for you to make should you want to do that. The gift giving season is coming up. All of them are made, or both of them are made from flannel. You could also do them from a lightweight wool lined with flannel, something that has a little bit of drape. You don't want your fabric to be too stiff. So we'll begin with this one, and we're going to make the scarf 30 inches long by 8 inches wide finished. And certainly you could make yours narrower if you're smaller. That happens to fit me. So what we need to do, and I give you those measurements first because this scarf has to be made first so that we can put the buttonhole through both of the layers. It's not something that we can create after we put the buttonhole in there. I strongly encourage you to reinforce the area for the buttonhole with fusible interfacing on the wrong side of the area where the buttonholes will be. The back of that yellow flannel is white, and you can see that this is fusible stabilizer that I have up in that top corner. I have chosen an overly large button for this project, and this is the beauty of the software. I can easily make the buttonhole as large as I need it. In this case, the button is 2 1/4, and with our additional 1/8 of an inch, we could even go an extra quarter for that. We would need our opening to be 2.5. We'll come back to the software and create that buttonhole. Start with a clean screen, and I'm going to go into the buttonhole feature and use the standard buttonhole. Scroll down so that you can see it. And at this point, remember, I can click anywhere because I'm going to fix the size of it here in just a moment. I'll put on my 3D so you can see it. I'm also going to change it to orange so that it matches what we have on the screen. Now, first thing we want to do is to set that slit so it is large enough to accommodate our 2 1/4 opening that we need. So with that buttonhole selected, I'm going to make this a 3.0. I'm going to put it up to 3 inches and apply it, and then get my ruler and measure my opening. Remember, we have a very large button right there. So this is almost the 2 1/2. That's perfect. So we had a good guess that first time. I'll go ahead and back out just a little bit. What I want to do now with my buttonhole, you know that we have the scarf. The scarf is going to be 8 inches wide. I'm going to draw a rectangle on my screen that emulates that scarf, and I'll select it and come into the transform so I can set the height at 8 inches. I'm not really concerned with the width. It is the 8 inches that I want, and again, I am giving this to help us place this buttonhole. Before I go any further, I look at this buttonhole, which is the 3 inches. That's a very large buttonhole, but to me, it's plain. I want to add some kind of design, and you can add any design that you own, any of those that are built into Perfect Embroidery Pro. You can add them to your buttonhole. I chose to go into the drop-down arrow for text designs and use the monogram designs, and I very much like this tassel right here. So I'll click and drag it down into place. I'm going to also change the color so it blends a little better with my orange. And I want those two aligned, so I'll hold down my Control key and select the buttonhole and come up here to the horizontal center align. Now I know that the buttonhole is directly above the tassel. I'm also going to come up here and group them, right? So now it's treated as one. And let me show you what the look of this scarf is if we break it down into more picture form. In order to get this drape on a point like this, the trick is, here again, we have a 30 finished by 8" finished. The trick is to put the button in the lower left-hand corner and the buttonhole in the top right corner. And I learned, having played with one, I liked it better when I slanted this buttonhole just a little bit. So this is the look we're after. We'll go back into our design screen. Remember that this box, I'm really concerned with just this top corner because this is my pretend scarf. I'll take this and rotate it. I could have used my rotate buttons if I wanted, but when I rotate it with my arrow, I can have a little bit of more control on the increments in between. So what I do there is just I place it where I think it would look nice with a little bit of spacing here and a little bit of spacing here. I might bring that down just a little bit for a little bit more spacing up at the corner. So in this case, this represents my scarf. This is going to be the slant on the buttonhole. I know that the opening is large enough and we have a decoration. At this point, I can take the artwork for the scarf and delete it and do a right click on my ruler and center origin. And at this point, I would do my File, Save As, and save it as a C2S. Go back under File, Save As, and save it as my machine format. And the other thing that I would do is come back under File and come down to Print Preview. I would want to print a template of this buttonhole to help me place it on my finished scarf and hoop it appropriately. So at this point, if you've not ever played with your templates or your print preview, you have a settings button where you can go in and make your choices of what you'd like to see on the printout. I wanted the actual size, the crosshairs, and the stitches. In this particular case, nothing else was important to me, so I would do an OK, and at that point I would go under Print, set up my printer, whether I wanted it in color or black and white, and move through the printing process. I'll cancel though. At this point with my template, I would then take my template on my finished scarf and position it where I want that buttonhole, making sure that the buttonhole is going to fit in that corner of the scarf. I remove the template and put the target sticker where the center of that design should be. Here you can see I've hooped up. This is washable adhesive stabilizer. It's the kind that is paper on the top and you score the paper out of the middle, remove the paper, and this is very tacky, very sticky. The red lines are coming from one of my most favorite tools that I own. It's the Perfect Align Laser, the PAL from Designs. And while we're talking about gift giving, certainly you can make scarves for other people, but for your own wish list, if you do not own a PAL, you might want to put that on your gift list to yourself. But here I have the center. I now lay my scarf aligning my target sticker with the center of the PAL laser lights, and I push down, I finger press it on that sticky stabilizer, take it to my machine, and do the embroidery. Of course, I would remove my target sticker. Once the embroidery is finished, you would certainly remove it from your stabilizer and take off the stabilizer from the back. Close to that, you could wash away the remaining. But you have a number of different options to open the buttonhole. I learned this trick years and years ago, and I do it to this day because I did make the mistake when I was younger, and I kept going with my seam ripper and just opened the whole end of the buttonhole. So by placing a straight pin inside the bar on both edges and then open up a slit, and then either your seam ripper or sharp scissors, you can also use a chisel that's made specifically for buttonholes to open them. So you have a number of different options. And the other trick is if you want to use a fray block on those edges. Some of you might be familiar with fray check. The difference is the fray block will give it a little softer finish. Fray check is a little stiffer, so you have some options there on how you actually open that buttonhole. And then, of course, we end up with our very lovely, stylish scarf with a custom buttonhole that is to a very large button. So to answer the previous question, you can create buttonholes. I think it was Sharon who asked, was there a limit? I have yet to reach a limit, but my buttonholes, the largest I've ever had for a button is a 3-inch button. So I've always been able to create the size buttonhole that I wanted. Dory, we'll stop there. Are there any other questions at this point?
Well, I want you to know I have done a 4-inch button, but I did it for a distinctly different project. I did mine for a shower curtain.
Oh, very fun. Yes, that's an excellent idea. To create buttonholes large and spaced evenly apart and use them. Buttonholes can be used in all kinds of home dec applications. That's a great idea. Thank you for bringing that up.
Well, we do have, Nancy asked, do you put the fray block on before cutting the opening?
Well, probably two schools of thought. I always do it after. You certainly could do it beforehand. The idea behind this is when you make this opening, whatever tool you choose to use, you try not to clip any of those satin stitches of the buttonhole. So the fray block is for the raw edge of the yellow flannel, but I guess I never thought about putting it on before. You certainly could do that. You'd want to wait till it dried, and then you could open your buttonhole. I think you could do it either before or after.
Okay, and those are buttonhole scissors, am I correct?
They're not specifically for that, but they are perfect for that.
Got it.
They weren't advertised as such, but I used them for that.
Okay, thank you.
Super. All right. We'll move ahead to our second project. This is another scarf. The difference in this one is that it's a little longer to start with, and also that we are setting our buttons, not the buttonholes, but the buttons on a slant. We also, because we're using 3, are going to address the need for placement for multiple buttonholes. So we'll go ahead and go back into the software, and this time our finished scarf will be 34 inches long, but that same 8-inch wide, and you would want to have your fused stabilizer where your buttons are going to go, just as we talked about previously. I'm going to start with a pretty buttonhole. This time we're going to use buttonhole 6, and I'll just go ahead and click on the screen and size it. We're going to use covered buttons, which are 1 1/8. Remember, we need to add that extra 1/8, so the slit will need to be 1.25. We will take a measurement here and measure in here, and the opening of that, I need to reset this to be our default size here, and we'll take a look at our ruler and do our slide, and that is our 0.87 in the middle of that. So we know that this needs to be bumped up. Once again, we'll try that 1.6 and see what we get, and use our ruler. And our ruler gives us a 1.3. That's going to be good. And even that extra is okay with a covered button, because the covered button is going to have fabric on it as well. So that little extra glide is always helpful. Take my select. So this particular buttonhole is correct. The size is good. I'm going to go ahead and rotate it. We are going to set it on a horizontal orientation, and I'm going to back out a little bit here because we're going to use the same trick we did before to set up our rectangle that will emulate our scarf. I'll size that so that the height is 8 inches, and we'll apply. Zoom back out, and this time I'm going to turn on my grid. If you've been with me before, you know I don't always use the grid. Some people like to work with it on, and some don't. Whichever you prefer, absolutely fine. But in this case, the grid lines are an inch apart, and that's going to help us with placement for our buttonholes. This middle buttonhole, I'll go ahead and set in this position. I'm going to copy it and paste it and drag that somewhere up there and paste again. Remember, if it's copied, it's still in the clipboard. We don't have to paste or copy it twice. I know that I need 3 buttonholes, but I need to set them up so that they are equally spaced for our 8-inch scarf. This particular buttonhole, I'm going to start with the middle one. It is in the 0 position on this grid line, and I'll go ahead and move it over. I'm looking to align the end of the rosebud heads with that grid line right there. Okay, now this one is in a proper position. I have 3 full inches above, so I'm going to split the distance of this one in this 1-inch area right here and walk it over so that the rosebuds are even with that line. I'll do the same here. I have these 3 inches. I'm going to drag over, position it in the center of that 1 inch, and then I will zoom in a little bit to make sure that my rosebud heads are where I want them to be. And if I need to nudge this, remember your trick for nudging is to hold down your control key and use your arrow. I just use the left arrow, and that looks better to me. I'll go ahead and do this and nudge just a little bit and come back down to the bottom. Select this one, control left arrow a couple times, and now I know that they're all evenly spaced. I'll come back here and zoom back, and at this point I can turn off my grid, and I have all of my buttonholes in an equal distance placed on that 8-inch scarf. We could save at this point with our file Save As, but there is one other thing you might want to do. We have 3 buttonholes that have multiple colors, and that is a lot of going back and forth with light pinks and dark pinks and greens and light greens in everything in each of the 3 buttonholes. Certainly you could do that at your machine if you chose to do it, but you can also resequence by color here in Perfect Embroidery Pro. The trick to that, though, is we must first break up the path. Do you see over here in the sequence view that the buttonhole is treated as one unit, and it's only listed as buttonhole? None of the colors or anything are listed. If we want to resequence by color, we would need to click on all items, right-click. Let me get all my buttonholes instead of my squares. Do a right-click, and we're going to break up path, okay, and change that. And when you do the breakup path, you can see that it is changing our, I apologize, that's not what I want to do. We want to group that and now rotate it. That would be a better deal. And I think that with this one, I undid the breakup, so I'll go do a right click, breakup path, select it. I don't need that anymore, we'll delete it. I'll select this, group it, rotate it, and last one, we'll do a breakup path, and I need to select it, group, rotate, rotate. Now, that might have seemed like a bit of a bother, but totally your choice. If you wanted to play the thread game at the machine, you could do that, or we could take just a moment to do our breakup path and do all of our resequence. So if we do a all items, edit, come down to resequence by color, now you have made the job very easy to do your 3 buttonholes. If we move forward with the process, we have a template again. You would do your print preview and print that off. This one I did not put in the crosshairs, but you can see I still used it to mark the center of the completed scarf. Once again, you have to create the scarf first, and that really is just a matter of cutting out your 2 pieces. If it's finished at 34 and 8, you would probably cut it at 35 and 9 and use 1/2-inch seams. That's what I did. Sew it right sides together, sew together, leaving an opening at one end of the scarf. To me, it would be the end that it's not going to hold the buttonholes. Turn it right side out, press it, and then stitch that opening closed. And then that's your finished scarf. We have the center marked with our target sticker, same as we did before. I would use my perfect alignment laser to place that in the hoop. This is the sticky wash away adhesive. This is what it looks like when it's all embroidered, and this is what it looks like in back without the stabilizer removed. So I would take my scissors and cut as closely to that as I could, and then if I needed to rinse it out in water to get any remaining. We then have beautiful buttonholes, and with these fun decorative buttonholes showing, you need a button that is worthy of those buttonholes. So very easily we can make covered buttons. You would need to purchase the covered button set to know the size. Again, mine is going to be that 1 1/8. If you have not used covered buttons, this is what they look like if you go to purchase them. If you've not done it before, make sure you get the one with a kit, and the kit is this holder and a plunger. Once you have a kit in a certain size, this actually is 1 1/2, you would only need to buy replacement buttonhole, the top end inserts to them. You would not have to buy the kit again. This is going to be our procedure, but let's go back to our screen and go about making our covered button. When you do this, again, you need the size of the button itself. Mine is 1 1/8. I start with creating a circle that represents the face of that button. So I used my artwork ellipse tool, holding down my control key, and I got a perfect circle. I'm going to come over here to the properties transform and size that to be the face of my button. The button is 1 1/8. So at this point, the actual size would be 1.125 for those of you out there that were watching my math before. So we'll go ahead and apply that, and this circle is the exact size of my 1 1/8 face button. So that helps me know placement of my embroidery within. And the other thing I'm going to do is a copy paste of that same circle. I'll change the second color to be the pink, and I'm going to come in here and size this to be 2 inches. And the reason for that is when you do a covered button, this is the face of the button, but you need additional fabric. Your circle that you cut out has to be larger. When you purchase a covered button set, on the back of the cardboard, there will be a pattern, the size that you need for this outer circle. So I know that it is a 2-inch circle, so I'm going to go ahead and make that and convert it to a run. And bear with me, I'll tell you in just a moment why that I created that as stitches. Knowing that I wanted this covered button to complement the buttonhole number 06, I certainly could have used this and worked with the rosebuds, but I see that this buttonhole number 2 has a pretty flower, but then I saw these on buttonhole 13, and that's what I've chosen to use. So we'll click to bring our buttonhole to screen, scroll down a bit, and this time, before we go any further, I need to do what we did before and right-click Break a Path. because I need to be able to take the pieces and parts that I want. I'm going to back out here just a little bit, and I will select the blue buttonhole. I do not need that. I'll hit a delete. As I come down to the flowers, they are grouped, so we need to come up here and do an ungroup. At that point, I can drag around the parts that I no longer want for this design, and I simply delete those parts. We get little stragglers going on. Those are easy to delete. Take a look here, and I've got one little straggler going on, and I'll delete that, a little pink one going on, and delete that. And at this point, I'm left with the flower that I want. So I will select it and group it back, and then drag it up and drop it. Let me size my circle here. Having trouble with my computer this evening, liking what I'm asking it to do. Nope. That one's 2 inches, and the blue one should be 1.125. Draw that again. .125 and apply. Check that size once again. Something is not liking. Let me go forward here so I'm not keeping us on here, and I'll show you what I've done. In creating them, we simply should have been able to drag that flower onto the screen, onto our button like this, and place it here. And in doing so, I would have brought up my 5x7 hoop, my 130 by 180 is the one selected, and bring it to screen, because I would want to fill up my hoops. If I need 3 of these buttons, I would make a 4th just in case something went wrong in the creating process or the putting it together. And then I have extra space up here that I filled in with other buttons. I'll come back to that in a moment, but let's address the reason why I made that a stitch. And as I bring you to this slide to show you the process, when we do multiple buttons like that, remember I said the pattern is always given to you, and instead of using a cardboard piece over my flower that would be very difficult to see what center is, I know that if I put that 2-inch circle on screen and make it thread, look what I've done for myself. I've given myself the ability to just cut right on that thread line, and my circle is perfect size for the button. Here are the pieces and parts that you need for your button. Here's the holder, the plunger, the back of the button, the front of the button, and this is the embroidered button cover face down. We take that and put it into the holder, pressing it down in there a little bit. The fabric starts to curl because this is round. You take the button face and put it face down onto the fabric and push it in a little bit, getting it all the fabric folded down and so forth going around. You're going to take the back of the button and place it shank up, position it in the holder, use your plunger to press down with the heel of your hand, and that causes the back to push in and hold the fabric in place on the top. I have an extra picture here to show you that in certain situations you might want to remove the shank. I'll show you why in just a moment. But at that point, you now have the covered buttons with your embroidery centered in the center of each of those buttons. Here is the idea that you might want to play with those extra buttons. These designs are in Perfect Embroidery Pro. Certainly you know you have letter capabilities. This button is nothing more than a series of individual circles that have a different motif applied to them, And all 4 of these are larger buttons. They're 1.5 inch, and this is our 1 1/8 that we were working with. But here is why you might want to remove the shank. If you have no shank, you can add a pin back with hot glue, or perhaps hot glue the buttons to hair clips and let them be some hair accessory. But with our buttons like that, we can wear them on jackets or collars or purses or anything fun for the holidays. So you have some other choices for those covered buttons. Dory, do we have any questions here? I'm going to go back to that one screen that was giving me fits, and I know why that happened, because our buttonhole was too large to start with. But are there any questions about the procedures?
Yes, there's one question that's over to the right in your sequence view. If I wanted to take one of those colors and take it out of line and readjust it, can I do it manually? You resequenced. I don't wish to resequence.
Before I did the resequence on that other one, you cannot, because the buttonhole is, when it is treated as, if I bring another one in, if I bring this one in, this buttonhole, if I have that selected, do you see over here in sequence view that there are no colors to that buttonhole? It is treated as one unit. What you can do is, if I come down here, I see that the starting color of that buttonhole is number 9. If everyone notices how that is black highlighted. If I were to come over here and, let's say, start my sequence color with number 2, look what it does. It'll give you different colors, but it starts with 2, it adds 3, 4, 5, and 6. However, many colors are necessary for that. You can come over here and right-click on the color, and it will, whatever color you start with, it'll give you the next number of colors. Even though that might not be what you want, you can see the pieces and parts differently and maybe play with them at your embroidery machine. But the only way that you can actually play with the individual colors is if you right-click and do the breakup path. But once you do that, then it's no longer considered a buttonhole. Everything is its own little piece and part.
Got it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Patty is so excited. She has let us know. And we had another question from Janet. And Janet says, does the stitch count change when you increase the size of the buttonhole design?
Absolutely. Because think of what we're asking is, we have a buttonhole, okay? And if we let's take this big one out of our way. We'll just get that one here. This buttonhole at the moment is 1.6 height. And if we take a look up here, the stitch count is 481. Let's come over here to height and add that 3 inches and apply. And we see the stitch count at 721.
Very good.
Okay. It has to increase. If we're making it bigger, it has to put more stitches in there.
Super. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And that brings up another question that I wanted to answer before someone asked it, so I'll go ahead and do that. When we look at these decorative buttonholes, we already established the fact that each of the buttonholes, the part of the buttonhole there, is 1 inch high. So if I were to select that one and I see the height at 1 inch, but we come over here under transform, the true height of all of the decoration and the buttonhole is almost 2.5. So under transform, transform will give us the size of the entire buttonhole. Whereas when we're under our properties buttonhole, this height is only referring to the height of the buttonhole itself, not all of the decorations. So you want to make sure that that is clear as well when you're working with them. We'll come to a clean screen, and we're going to talk about another feature that's very fun that goes along with buttons, and that is our bead feature. We can easily create bling with this particular feature. If we use the drop-down arrow and go into select, what we see are beads of all different colors, and these would be those that are hand sewn on. You see the holes right there. But the idea is that we could choose the color to complement your embroidery so you can see it right on screen. We can also choose from crystals with different shapes. We have pearls with different shapes. We have rhinestones with many different shapes. I'm sort of a crystal girl, so I'm going to go ahead and choose Crystal 05. Double click that. Once again, we see our mouse as a crosshairs. I'm going to start up here, and I'll click once with a normal click, and now I'm going to right click. I didn't move my mouse at all. I simply clicked and right click. The right click actually ends the bead creation. So we see one bead on screen. Now I'm going to come down right below it and click once, and then drag my mouse over to the 2-inch mark and click again. Right click to end, and you see what's different is that I have a whole line of beads. We'll try one more. I'll click here. I'll click over at 1 inch. I'll go up and I'll go over. And now I'll do a right click, and you can see that I've created a sort of shape. Before we go any further, let me explain to you what's actually happening here. I need to get my select key, and the best way to show you is to go under slow redraw. Do you see these markings here? This is what's actually going to happen on your fabric. This is what the embroidery is going to do, and it's making a mark where each of those beads would need to be placed. Okay, so if we watch this stitch out a little bit, this is actually what's going to stitch on your fabric. Again, it is making a mark so that you can go back in later and use your hot fix wand or your iron, depending on the process that you use, to place your beads. And if anybody out there is new to this, this is what we're talking about here with rhinestones and crystals and your hot fix wand. It comes with a different headset for the different sizes that you can purchase, or you can also do it with an iron. Eileen actually had a fun blog once where she showed how she did things like that with an iron. We'll come back into our bead screen. Oops, and I'll find that bead screen. And at this point, if I select this row right here, we now have our properties for beads. The default size is a 6 millimeter. I happen to own 3 millimeter and 4 millimeter crystals, so I'm going to change that to a 4 millimeter, and you can see what happens to my line. It automatically readjusts and will space them evenly from my first point to my last point. It knows the proper math to place the appropriate number of beads or crystals in that area. The spacing, they are equally spaced at 1 millimeter apart. I could change that if I wanted the spacing to be the same size as the bead itself. I could put in a 4 millimeter for spacing, and you see how that bar has been spread out. I could also ask it to trim between the beads, and you see that there is no more jump stitch. I'll take that out so you can continue to see it. And then at this point, the last option that we have here at the top is at node. And what that means is, if I put a check mark and apply that, do you remember when I created this line, I clicked here in the starting position and dragged my mouse over and clicked here. In other words, it's only putting a bead at my beginning and ending point because I had no points in between. If I were to do that with this particular design, remember I clicked here, here, up, and over. So I had 4 clicks. If I choose to put those at node, that's what I get, the number of clicks that I had to make this shape. So that's our at node. I'll click this one back and take out the at node, and I have my beads back at my 4 size. And we come down to mark. The mark size is the size of that circle itself. Well, for me, if I have my crystal at 4 millimeter, I don't really want my mark size at 4 because I don't want any of that thread to show. So I'll probably back that down to a 2.5 and apply it. And the marking now is smaller than the head of the crystal, which is logical to me. The other option that I have is either the default that we saw kind of looks like a pizza with a piece of pizza cut, or I could choose to do a cross. We'll apply that, go back into our slow redraw so you can see the difference. And here is an X, or this is the default circle with that little pizza piece marked for us. So this is totally up to you. If you prefer your markings as an X, or you like the circle so that you can get that crystal or that bead right inside that circle. Absolutely your choice on the look of that particular marking. All right, now what can we do with these? Well, we see that we can make lines and perfectly spaced beads. We can make somewhat of a shape. If we come into a clean screen and I go get that pretty buttonhole again, this one with a flower, and I click on screen to bring it in, I'm going to size that back to the default of 1 inch. Okay, turn on my 3D so that we can see that. And now I'll go get my bead. I'm going to play with the same crystal because I know that I have those. I'll set my crystals to be a 4 millimeter and my mark size to be a 2.5. I'll leave the spacing at 1. And now I have my crosshairs. You know certainly that you could click once to set our bead here, and we could have done this the old-fashioned way. In the earlier days, I could have just used my wand and eyeballed those positions, but now that I have the software, I can come up and drag down that guideline and move that bead up just a little bit and get that perfect over the size. Again, the beauty of the software and the beauty of putting those beads right where I want them in the software. I'll go back and click. All I have to do is click on the star, and that last bead that I had chosen with all of the properties is now available for me. And at this point, I could click right alongside my leaf for the flower, and now I get my beads perfectly spaced. I can select that group, come up here, do a copy, paste, do a flip to mirror that and drag that into my other position, and now I have a very lovely marking for my beads, and again those will stitch out as placements and my beads will be in the exact position I need them to be. We can do something else with our beads. Again, I'm going to go in and get my crystal. You can play with whatever you'd like. I'm going to click once and right click to get a single bead. I select it, and we can go up here to our circle template and click on that. Comes in. I'm not going to use my 200 millimeter or my 100 millimeter hoop. I'm actually going to bring that down to a 50, the size of my circle, and apply. It'll put those 8 beads in a perfect circle, but I'm going to have some fun here with my crystals, so I'll go ahead and put 20, and you can see that it evenly spaces this. And if I bring it to screen, and even if I put a monogram or something fun in there, I have a perfectly spaced circle with my beads, and it's very easy to accomplish that. If you take a look here, this is one of the pictures on the new website. Denise had asked me to play with the word wow and came up with a couple designs, and she went ahead and put a circle of her crystals right here in the middle, which came out very fun. Right before I give you a goodbye, Dory, do we have any other final questions for this evening before I end?
No, but I want you to know there's an awful lot of thank yous on this board.
Oh, how nice. And everybody out there, again, I hope couple of fun ideas for gift giving in here as well. Tonight's goal was to make you more comfortable with using the built-in buttonholes and bead tool. You now have more ways to add your own individual style to your creations. And isn't that one of the main reasons you purchased the software? Thank you all so very much. Good night.
Thank you so much. Good night.